The New York Liberty did get revenge against the Atlanta Dream, but then what happened against Minnesota? And the New York Liberty will have to figure out the LA Sparks once again coming up this week. All that and more on this episode of Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. Gotta get up, gotta get up, gotta get up. Hey, women's basketball fans, welcome to Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans, brought to you by Rosie Media and hosted by Erica L. Ayala. Welcome to another episode of Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. I am here with Brian Fleurantin, the Renaissance tour man himself. Erica L. Ayala, your host here and founder of Rosie Media. But Brian, before we talk about New York Liberty, let's talk a little Beyonce. You got to catch up with the Renaissance tour. How was that?
Yes, I was there last night. So we got there 3 hours early. Like I saw people like they got there a little bit late. No, get there early. We were inside. It rained apparently, but we were inside in a mall before the concert. So we missed the rain. We got all the show. I got hold up. I'm glad I have this next to me. I got some merch. Got some shirts. Had to make sure to really take in the full experience. It was amazing. Like she could have easily went another hour, and I'd have been happy. I'd have stayed there till 3 a.m. if I had my way.
I love that. I'm very happy for you. Glad that you missed the rain and had a good time. But, I don't know if it was a renaissance, but definitely maybe two teams looking for a little revenge. And we talked about that on our last episode of Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans as part of Rosie Media. So let's just hop in, Brian. We're going to talk about the game earlier last week. That was the New York Liberty. They were hosting the Atlanta Dream on Thursday, July 27th. Now, they did get the win. And it seems, Brian, that you are not the only person that noticed Ryan Howard's July 27th tweet. Talk to us about this win.
So after the game, I didn't see it in press. Well, in post game, Stewie said Atlanta had July 27th circled on the calendar, but we did too. So that was the first thing I caught. And then I saw a Twitter video after, like when the players started celebrating after the win. Stewie was mockingly saying July 27th, and then JJ in the background was like July 20 what? And I'm like, oh, they really had it locked down and ready for this one, which I loved. And to make it all better, the social media team had their fun, and they retweeted the original July 27 tweet, which I thought was a 10 out of 10. And then they brought up they had the graphic with a Drake lyric attached to it, which was even better, which I loved. Like I love when teams get to have fun a little bit, just like polite fun. Like nothing too sort of like mean. It was great. I loved it. And I think for the game itself, it showed what the Liberty can look like when they're fully dialed in. Like one of the big things that carried across 3 wins is that they're a lot bigger than Atlanta. Even without Dulce and Han, they muscled Atlanta all night long. Like they pounded them in the paint. They locked them down. They kept Atlanta stagnant on offense. And even when Atlanta went on a mini run to get it kind of close, they just hit the Banach Laney button, and that was that. Like Laney was, I think, the MVP of the game. Like we talked about her last week about how valuable Laney is to the team, and she kept helped hold Ryan Howard to 4 for 17. Had her had her as a complete non-factor in the game, and then hit bucket after bucket in the fourth quarter, just to sort of like really keep Atlanta down for the count for good. So that was, I thought, a fascinating game. Like they really came, they came locked in. They were prepared to really hold it down, and they jumped out the gate fast. Like I think they were up like 19-2 in the first quarter, something wild, and they just really sort of like established that dominance early and never let up really.
Yes, and you ended where I wanted to pick up, which of course is our lead change chart or our game chart. And we're going to flash it up here for those watching on YouTube. For those listening on audio, I'll talk you through it. But there was absolutely no lead ever for the Atlanta Dream. You can see on the graphic that we have up on the screen that, yes, the New York Liberty dominated the lead tracker. Now, here's another thing I thought was really interesting, Brian, because we also see that the New York Liberty starters outscored Atlanta starters 84-50. But Atlanta's bench outscored the Liberty bench 34-11. So that's something just to keep in mind as we not only talk about the rest of the games this week, because there were 2 more games, but also going into next week a little bit later on the show. You mentioned rebounding. We've talked about rebounding. It was a big topic on the national broadcast for Sunday's game, which again, we'll get into. But the New York Liberty rebounded 30-21, or won the rebound battle 30-21 outright there. Brianna Stewart, another 30-plus point game. She had 33 points. Alicia Gray had 25 points. Rebounding, Jonquel Jones once again hit double digits, but it was what you talked about. And Ryan Howard even had a little bit of fun with some of the tweets that were going around. And, she said she has to be better. She responded to the New York Liberty tweet, said, effectively, it's all good fun. When you dish stuff out, sometimes it comes back to you. And like you said, I don't think Ryan Howard took it any kind of way, or even if she did, it's becoming now just locker room poster board material, whiteboard material. But she was held to 10 points, as was Cheyenne Parker. We already mentioned Gray dropped to 25. Ari McDonald also with 18 points. But again, Banaja Laney coming through. You mentioned how she played Ryan Howard, but had 14 points. The second highest scorer after Brianna Stewart, though, was Jonquel Jones with 19. So we talked about Jonquel Jones. It seems to be a theme where a lot of people are talking about her ups and downs, but Jones seems to be settling in. So that's the good news. Now, we also talked about this, Brian, last episode, that this was the first back-to-back. Now, it was effectively, they didn't have to go anywhere, but still a back-to-back. And we also saw that the next game against the Minnesota Lynx, Courtney Vandersloot did not play due to rest. And it's a Minnesota Lynx team that early on in the season didn't really look like they were going to do much of anything, but has started to climb their way back into playoff contention. Again, the top 8 teams in the WNBA make the playoffs. What did we see in the second game of that back-to-back as the New York Liberty hosted the Minnesota Lynx?
Yeah, I walked away from Friday's game and today's Minnesota Lynx game wildly impressed with this team. They surprised the heck out of me. I'm almost speechless to say, because when the Liberty got up 15-5, I was off covering something. I'm like, they'll get these dudes out of here. But then after Minnesota took that initial timeout, it's like it's like a switch flipped, and they were really up in the Liberty's grill. They made shots hard for them. They won the rebounding battle, which was the first time in a while that the Liberty had lost the rebounding battle. So they were able to sort of establish that physical presence. Dorka, the young center, was fantastic. Diamond Miller, who we talked about a few days ago, was excellent. And
both of them have been playing so well for Minnesota as of late. I mean, it has really been fantastic that Minnesota's getting those performances from their younger players, which I think then opens up things for some of their other players. And we have to remember I just got so excited to talk about their young talent for the Lynx, but also they're doing this without Nafisa Collier, who has, I believe it's effectively like an ankle injury.
Turned the Jets on and got it down to as close as 1. And then Diamond Miller hit a 3 with 2 minutes left. That sort of sealed the game. And just that for a young team to withstand a flurry from the Liberty like that, because we've seen teams crumble when the Liberty hit them with big runs, teams just sort of quake. But Minnesota was able to withstand that and finish the game strong on the road, and with a crowd that was fully turned up and locked into the game. I thought that was incredibly impressive for Minnesota. And for the Liberty side, it was a situation where it was a little bit of the back-to-back fatigue, where fourth game in the week, second straight game, having to expend all that energy to make it all the way back in. I think it started to catch up to them late. And I think not having Vandersloot around and combined with an off Johannes game sort of like left the offense sort of like in a lurch outside of Sabrina Ionescu, who heated up from deep. But otherwise, I think this is a game where I feel once you start strong, it's like you even when you're tired, you got to sort of figure out how to power through regardless to try to get to the finish line. But I think there's still something to learn from them for the group is that you have to maintain that presence on the interior. You can't sort of like let up even for a little bit because teams can catch you slipping even for like half a second, and then that's all it takes. So I think that's something that the team sort of emphasized and expressed in post game, and I think something that they'll try to stick to mind going forward.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I go back and forth, Brian, regarding how much we need to quote unquote worry about the New York Liberty when they do have these games like this. And we'll talk about another one. Again, the New York Liberty played 3 games. So we'll talk a little bit about them getting a lead, but are they able to maintain the lead? But something interesting, because I know we've talked about this before. I hope I can speak for you here, but I'm pretty confident we're card carrying members of the MJ23 club. Like, we are fans of Marine Johannes and her game. That being said, we have noticed that similar to Jonquel Jones, we've talked about both of these players a lot, and that their temperament or how they handle their own self-critical voice is how I would explain it, is a little bit different, I think, than some of their other teammates. And sometimes they need a little bit of support to kind of get out of their own head. And both have said that throughout the season. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because you mentioned Marine had a little bit of an off game. We know JJ, especially on the rebound, has been in her bag. But I saw a comment on one of our episodes on YouTube, and someone mentioning, which I thought was really funny knowing the history of the New York Liberty, but they mentioned that we need more guards to penetrate and slash through the paint. And I thought that was a very interesting comment, because a couple of years ago, like the last few seasons of Bill Lambier's tenure, I feel like all we had were guards that were slashing and cutting, right? And we were not as effective with guards who could shoot from the perimeter. Now I think we have a pretty solid mix, but I would still argue that while Marine Johannes can be a guard that penetrates, it's more so a way to open up the defense for her teammates as opposed to her being able to take the ball hard to the paint. There's a difference. There's a way of finessing and, being like a hot knife through butter, which Marine Johannes has in spades. But then there's the strategic taking contact, being, as I like to say about Courtney Vandersloot, a little bit slippery at times. And we've also talked about Sabrina Ionescu. I think she's quicker than I sometimes remember, but her first step is not as great as Marine's, and certainly not as great as Courtney Vandersloot's. So I'm wondering if you think that the guards that were activated for the New York Liberty, what would you like to see from them, given that, just that we know that this is a team, the New York Liberty, that can shoot from the perimeter, but do you think the guards are doing enough to kind of get especially the post defenders a little bit off kilter and make more space for their own post players?
Yeah, I think that the team can sort of can stand to get in the paint even more than they do already. Without Vandersloot, Sandy mentioned that they would it was almost like the word of the press conference on Friday was trigger happy, where like they didn't really move the ball as well as they needed to, as we usually do see with them. And then it lets a lot of like contested perimeter jumpers. And I think that's where Vandersloot's absence played a role, because she's always someone, there are like maybe 3 or 4 plays a game where she just gets a wide open layup to the basket off a handoff. And I'm like, oh, wow, there's Sloot getting a wide open layup again. So not having that was really sort of like missing for the team. And with Sloot, she can drive and finish at the rim, but also she has such great court vision that she can always like spot a Laney in the corner, Stewie in the corner, JJ in the corner. So having that ability to penetrate the defense and sort of create open looks for her teammates in the perimeter is a nice +1. But when you're able to get to the basket and finish over traffic, that's where the money is for this team. So I think as they continue on, just sort of continuing to attack the paint, be relentless in that regard. Lainey during the week talked about how defenses were closing out more on her at the 3-point line. So what did she do naturally? Took it to the basket, finished over defenders, finished in traffic, did all of that. So I think for the Liberty, just always remembering that the threes are going to be there no matter what. Like they take a bunch, they make a bunch, and players like Ines who can bend the defense from practically half court. So those shots are always going to be there whenever they need to dial it up. But when they're at their peak is when they're able to really sort of like wear teams out on the interior and get out on the run.
Yeah, for sure. No, I appreciate you weighing in on that. Always gonna go to my handy dandy chart here, but I think you can see the chart here for this Minnesota game, as you mentioned, starting off hot, starting off early for the New York Liberty, and then just total domination by the Minnesota Lynx. And I mean, you love to see it for the Lynx, maybe not so much if you're rooting for the New York Liberty, but I mean, again, Kayla McBride was an issue. I mean, really saw fired up Kayla McBride as of late for this Minnesota team. I think, honestly, it was a little bit of the New York Liberty not doing some of the things, Brian, that you just mentioned, and the Minnesota Lynx being able to start to find their groove and find their game. And so the Liberty caught the Lynx at a time where they had to play their top game. And so you mix that with the fact that, again, the New York Liberty have this super team slapped across their forehead, at least in media. And so what does that mean? Every other team is going to want to chip away at that armor. And I effectively think that's what happened here. Now, I don't think it's anything that we have to get worked up about. I know there are a lot of people who don't like that the New York Liberty are considered a super team. I mean, some players and the head coach of the New York Liberty included. But when you have that, whether it's right or wrong, proven or unproven, you're going to get everyone's best game. And we saw that Minnesota, they really were able to, outperformed the bench, outperformed the New York Liberty bench 14-5. Once again, the rebounds were about even. The turnovers overall continue to be a little bit of an issue for the New York Liberty, but they also turned over Minnesota 14 times for, so I still want to see the New York Liberty be able to tighten up when it comes to possessing the ball and protecting the ball. But that was the Minnesota game. So that brings us to LA on the road. We talked about this last week, Brian. Now the New York Liberty are going to get to stay in the LA area because they have effectively not back-to-back games, but it's the same opponent, same arena, and they will be at crypto.com Arena Center. Who knows what it's called? Something, that stadium in downtown LA. They'll be playing there this coming week. But we once again saw the New York Liberty get a really early start, but perhaps lose sight of being able to close out the game strong. So this was, I didn't mention the score for the Lynx game, just real quick. That was an 88-83 win for Minnesota over the New York Liberty. But on Sunday, the New York Liberty were able to get an 87-79 win over the Sparks. But, what did you see from this game? We see De'Erica Hamby had 21 points coming off of the bench for LA, and Jordan Canada with another 17. Overall, once again, you saw Brianna Stewart be the top scorer for the New York Liberty with 25 points. And then you had Maureen Johannes with 15. So I really like that bounce back for Maureen. But what were some of your takeaways, Brian?
I thought that the defense in the first quarter was scary good. Like, it went on, I believe, a 19-0 run, and they held the Sparks to, I think the broadcast said they missed 12 straight shots. So you saw what happens when the defense is fully flying all over the court. There was one play, I think Canada drove to the basket. Still, we just sent that thing right out of bounds. JJ was really a presence on the inside. I think even Ionescu had a block on the perimeter. They were flying all over the court. and they made everything impossible because with the Sparks, NECA is the engine of their offense, and the Liberty were really able to make her a non-factor by and large, which is really hard to do considering she's having the best season of her career. So we saw what happens when the defense is really dialed in that fashion. They had the Sparks in a vice grip that whole time. And even when LA started to sort of wake up a little bit, but turned the Jets right back on and got that lead right back up to like 20 plus as soon as you knew it. And I think what also that stemmed from the great ball movement. We talked about MJ, and one thing about MJ is she can make tough shots, but if you get her easy baskets, they're practically automatic with the way she's back to where she is now. So a lot of the great ball movement got her wide open, clean looks at the basket, and it made life easy for her. And then in the second half, JJ really started to put her input on the game on the offensive end. On the board, she was incredible. There was, I want to say for like the first like 29 minutes of the game, Jay had more rebounds individually than LA did as a team combined. So I think that just shows where the team is when it comes to rebounding. Like when they win, they own the boards. JJ is like, nothing gets through and you're not grabbing anything when she's around. So I think that seeing her be able to have that presence on the interior, pop out, hit some jump shots, hit some threes, really be that extra option is a great thing. And one that the team has really been leaning into more since the Dallas loss a couple weeks ago. So I think that was another great thing to continue. They sometimes let go of the rope a little bit, which is a result of them turning the ball over. When LA went on that run, New York just sort of like they started getting sloppy, just bad turnovers, a few rush shots, and then I think that's where the sort of like I think there's a natural letdown throughout a game if you get up by like 22, 23, 24 points, and sometimes teams can sort of, especially with the proclivity of the three-pointer, you can just get on a quick spurt and then you're right back in it, and then the home crowd is giving you that extra bit of burst of energy as well too. So I think that combined with the Liberty's turnovers sort of like got the Sparks all the way back in. But one thing about the team is that when they do let up leads and it gets close, they're able to sort of like center themselves and then deliver the knockout blow, which Ionescu did. When LA got it down to 7, she hit a 3 on the wing that just sort of like locked it up officially, made it so that way the Sparks were not going to get back into it. So I think that it's something where actually I think it's a great quality to be able to withstand a flurry from the opponent and still come out on top. I think it speaks to the sort of perseverance and grit of this team, which I think will serve them well in higher stakes games coming down the line, especially on the road, just being able to withstand teams' best runs and still come out strong. But in a perfect world, you want to, it's Los Angeles. You want to win big, go outside, walk down Sunset Boulevard, take pictures and stuff, and then go back home. So if you can win by like 25 and get home earlier, that's the perfect world. But in this one, take the win, keep building that toughness, and then prepare for Tuesday night.
Yes, indeed. They will see the same opponent again. That was a 87-79 win for the New York Liberty on Sunday. The lead tracker, all New York Liberty. There were no leads for the Sparks, but to your point, when you were up 20, the biggest lead for the New York Liberty was 27, and then you start to see that lead chip away. You kind of wonder what's going on here, but all of the work had been done. And so I think there's a little bit of tempering expectation versus the New York Liberty also just being able to manage the flow of a game, perhaps a little bit, because I do wonder, this is an LA Sparks team that has the injury bug and like literal viral kind of bugs have been hitting this team really hard, but they still had a pun intended spark to them. And these are the kinds of teams that once they start reestablishing their roster, getting some confidence for some of their young players, these are not the kind of teams that I want this New York Liberty team to be facing down the wire, either at the end of the regular season or in the playoffs, because that's, at least as of what we know from this New York Liberty team right now, I think all of the ingredients are on the countertop. And sometimes a little too much salt, sometimes not enough salt for this team. And they just have to figure out the balance and make sure that they are complementing each other. And so that's the challenge right now for the New York Liberty, but that's going to be ongoing. although they do have that super team tag, they are the super team that is having to learn chemistry on the fly. So an interesting game for sure here. Just to be consistent, take you back over, pop it up on the screen here, but take you back over to the lead tracker. Love that the WNBA, excuse me, is giving us advanced data. So why not use it? You see that the starters here for the New York Liberty were able to really get things done. The bench came with another 20 points, but once again, outscored. The bench was outscored by their opponent. That's the third consecutive game. Also out rebounded overall. So I'm very curious to see what we're going to start getting from the bench. That has to be something that's activated. We talked about it a little bit last show, Brian, but we have seen Jocelyn Willoughby activated a little bit more. So I think that's just going to come with some consistency, but sooner rather than later, you want to get the New York Liberty reserves feeling confident, feeling comfortable, and absolutely knowing, not just knowing their role, but owning their role, because they will make or break. Mark my words right now, they will make or break a New York Liberty postseason run, the bench. And not necessarily that you need a player like a De'Erica Hamby, right, to come off the bench and get a 20 spot every single game. I'm not saying we won't take it, but what I'm saying is they need to make the right plays at the right time. We've talked about this a few times, Brian, and I think that's another thing that Sandy Brondello is going to have to start building up, which leads me to a question. So we have the same opponent back to back. Breanna Stewart is solid for what? What is she even averaging? I just off of my memory and eye test, I'm saying she's probably averaging about 25 points a game, somewhere in that range. She's hit 30 plus multiple times already this season. We saw Courtney Vandersloot get rest. We've seen JJ out with injury early on and, just reacclimating herself. We've seen Sabrina Ionescu out with a little bit of a hamstring bug, took some games off. But do we need Stewie to have rest? I mean, and maybe this is a question for Stewie. We'll have to catch up with her. But Brian, I'm going to ask you, are you concerned that we have been effectively riding Breanna Stewart, especially offensively? Or do you think that Stewie's good and she just needs to get all these reps in before the playoffs? What are your thoughts?
I think earlier on, I was more concerned because there were stretches early in the season where she was playing 37 like every night, and the team has started to sort of dial it back a little bit with her when it comes to that, which I think is great. Which I think has also, interestingly enough, has seen Jocelyn Willoughby get more minutes in the rotation, which gives the Liberty more switchability on defense. Like we've seen Sandy roll out JJ, Willoughby, Laney, and Thornton foursome, and it's been working well. So I think they'll go to that a little bit more, just to buy Stewie a little bit more rest, so to keep her minutes in like the 31, 32, or preferably 30 if you can. That way you empower the bench, trust Willoughby to keep making good plays on defense, and if JJ is still on big, have the offense run through her. So I think that it'll be great just to get her more pockets of rest every so often, or if you get out to these huge leads, keep them up. You have Stewie playing stress-free minutes. So if she's playing like a 32 where you're comfortably up by like 17 points, she's not having to sort of like burn maximum energy, just sort of like preserve her lead or get the Liberty back in. Just making sure that she's able to get her reps in, keep building that chemistry, and keep her safe in that regard is very valuable. But I think if the Liberty are able to hold off the Sun enough to keep that 2 seed, we might see them give her a little bit more rest down the line. I think once they lock up that positioning, probably like towards the end of August, early September, if they're far enough ahead of Connecticut, that might be the avenue to sort of cut her minutes down a little bit more. Just make sure she's not sitting out completely, but keeping her minutes in the 20s if you can. So that way you can gear up for like a big playoff run where I think we can expect the team to sort of like ride their ace to like 37 minutes a night, which I think would make more sense then. But for now, just continuing to get those reps in, having Stewie on the court sort of like draw all the attention, and then being able to sort of fling the ball all over the place to make sure you get good looks for everybody else. I think her presence, even if she's not the focal point of the offense in a particular moment, allows for such confidence and comfort for everyone else. It makes sense to almost have her as a decoy, for lack of a better term.
Interesting. Yeah. And I was close. She's averaging just a hair, just a scotch over 23 points per game. But the minutes, to your point, yes, are up there. She's averaging right now 34 minutes per game, which she has not done, Brian, since her rookie year in 2016 for Seattle. She averaged 34.7 points her rookie season. And she's averaging right now for the New York Liberty in 25 games, she's averaging 34.2 minutes. So interesting. We'll have to keep up with that for sure. But we'll see what happens with Stewie as they take on Stewart, and the New York Liberty will take on the Sparks. Once again, I want to go to the standings because we talked about Minnesota being on a roll, and they didn't stop just with the New York Liberty. So, now they handed the Connecticut Sun a loss, 87-83 on Sunday. That's wrapped and final. So the Connecticut team also caught a very lightning hot Minnesota Lynx team. But to your point, the standings pretty tight. Las Vegas is still, they have the highest winning percentage at basically a 900. They are 22-2. The New York Liberty are now 19-6. So about a 75% win percentage, and the Connecticut Sun right behind them at 18-7 with a 72% winning percentage here. Now, the New York Liberty, we know, already won out for the Commissioner's Cup, and they will see the Las Vegas Aces for the Commissioner's Cup championship on August 15th. But we will get to see that matchup once again before the Commissioner's Cup in the regular season, as the New York Liberty will host the Las Vegas Aces. But again, they have a pretty interesting schedule. So we have mentioned it a few times, Brian. They will take on the Sparks. That's going to be a 10 p.m. game on Tuesday night. So make sure you get your nap in the middle of the day. Then the New York Liberty will take on, once again, the Minnesota Lynx. That's going to be on the road. So they're going to be making their way back from the East Coast. And that's going to be on Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern. That's on Ion as part of the Friday lineup, once again, for the New York Liberty. And then on ABC at 3 p.m. Eastern time, the New York Liberty return to Barclays Center, where they will be met by the Las Vegas Aces. Now, travel might be a little bit of a factor. We did hear from Sabrina Ionescu, though, on Sunday's game, that they know about the travel schedule. Obviously, they are beholden to that schedule, but we're not using travel as an excuse for the game against the Sparks. And I would imagine if you ask Sabrina that same question leading up to Sunday's game, where they're traveling back now to New York, she'll say the same thing. Now, Brian, I think it's fair to say that a lot of people around women's basketball, or just basketball overall, have that Sunday game circled. But I want to ask you this question. Given that they're going to play the Sparks and they're going to play the Lynx, the last two teams that they played, what would you like to see the New York Liberty squad do now that they can put in some work and refine some things against two teams that they just played in order to get ready for Las Vegas? What will be a good indication for you that the New York Liberty are focused and ready to give their A game on Sunday?
I would say keeping the turnovers down. Like, when the Liberty go bad is when they cough the ball up, they rush. So I think if the Liberty are able to sort of take their time, run their offense like they normally do, they'll be fine and ready to go for Sunday. But if they're rushing into stuff, if they're trying to make home run plays every possession down, they're going to get in trouble. And against a team like Vegas, if you do that, you are cooked. So they're gonna need to make sure that they take their time on offense. Don't speed themselves up if they don't have to, and then just sort of run your stuff and be confident in what you're doing and trust that you're making the right play and not to overthink. Like we talked about MJ sort of like being, I guess, temperamental in a sense. In post game, she mentioned that sometimes she overthinks, and it's something that, which is natural. I think we all do it sometimes too, but you have to remember not to sort of put too much pressure on your shoulders. Just trust that what you're doing is right and that you know that your skills can take you down the right path. So not to overthink, trust that the offense and the strategy is working well, and then make sure you don't make any unnecessary, unforced errors. I think if they do that, they'll be able to really sort of like have a great chance to win. And I think also what helps the team now as compared to when we saw them in June against Vegas is that JJ is more activated and fully like dialed in. And for Vegas, without Candace Parker, if the Liberty are able to sort of like wear down Kia Stokes, possibly get her in the foul trouble, Vegas would have to play Asia at center, which opens up some stuff for Stewie on the other side if you're able to sort of like mix and match and things like that. So if they're able to sort of pound the inside, really own the boards and own the low post, that's going to be where they can really set the tone and really establish that they're like right. If they're not at where Vegas is at, they're like a half a step below. If they do that, I think they'll win, and they'll really sort of like remind people that this is an excellent club and not one to be trifled with.
I love that. You mentioned two of the things that I was going to also address. Continuing that streak of, I believe now JJ is at 6 games where she's had 10 or more rebounds. Need that to continue. We've been talking about that for weeks now, Brian, and because we see it, we see the results when JJ is aggressive in the paint, offensively and defensively. And I think also Jonquel Jones, if I want to add a little bit of a wrinkle to that, I think we know that Jonquel Jones, I would argue right now, if you were to take Jonquel Jones versus an Asia Wilson, you have to really play JJ honestly on the perimeter, because we know she can make that shot. We know Asia can as well, so I don't need nobody coming in my mentions. I'm not throwing shade, I'm not kidding. But listen, if 9 times out of 10, I would go with JJ to take that perimeter shot over Asia from the arc. That's just me. I'm just calling it like I call it. But you know why? Because the Aces don't need necessarily Asia to shoot from there. The reason it's effective when JJ shoots from the perimeter, when Stewie shoots from the perimeter, is because then you literally have a 5-out situation where all 5 players on the Liberty at any given time can effectively shoot from 3, and with a hand in their face or on the top of their head like MJ. So that's something that we need for not just JJ, but for the whole team to really do, is to try and draw out the Aces, because I think the Aces are a team, and I like that you talked about controlling pace, or I remixed what you said a little bit to be about controlling the pace of the game, because the Aces can run. The Aces, that's all they do is run. And they like playing that quick transition game. And what did Sandy say to us after Sunday's game is that she felt transition or defense in transition, as well as the turnovers, Brian, are 2 of the main things that even in that win over the Sparks, she felt her team needs to work on. And we got to be real, Brian. Those are not things that are unique to just playing the Sparks. Those are bugaboos for the season. So the question that I asked you, since we're playing 2 opponents and we have direct metrics that we can measure from game to game, I want to see the New York Liberty really take a look at their turnovers and take a look at their transition game, both as they're getting up offensively and, to Sandy's point, getting back defensively. And I think if they can really harness that power leading into Sunday, it will be in a really good position to, as you said, prove that they are the type of team that is in that conversation with the Vegas Aces. Another thing, and we might have to get into this on our next episode, but I am very curious to hear, and I'm going to maybe ask these questions because I'm expected to be in New York, so we should be able to do our next episode of Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans in person, which I'm so excited for. We get to officially meet and not just via our internet connection. But I'm excited because I think I want to dive in, Brian, for next week into which team do we think is better suited to start and stop at the top of the table, and which team is a little bit, I've been watching a lot of cooking shows, so which team do we think needs to bubble up and really collect all those juices to be its best? What do we think suits the New York Liberty more? Having to start, getting out early and just going with it, or are they a team that kind of needs to go with the ebbs and flows, feel a little bit of the hits, and then build on that so they're playing their best basketball down the wire? To be determined, to be discussed, Brian. But as always, thank you so much for joining me here on Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans, part of Black Rosie Media. But Brian, we know that we're not gonna break your soul here. We're gonna let you rock out on that Beyonce high for the rest of the weekend. So we're gonna keep it moving here. But Brian, let the folks know what you got coming down the pike and what they can expect from you.
Yes. This week we have a story. Speaking of JJ, we'll have a story about her progress and her improvement. It's really exciting. We have some other stuff coming down the line too, and then keeping up with the team throughout the week.
Fantastic. And like I said, I plan to be in Brooklyn leading up to and certainly after the big matchup, August 6th, circle it on ABC. Everybody gonna be out here. So we're gonna see. We definitely will. There will be lots of fodder, I'm sure, but more importantly, we'll be able to have more data analytics to really figure out where these two, air quotes, super teams are at this point in the season, because we're already past the halfway point. I mean, it's 40 games each team, and we're already rolling. A lot of teams are up to 23, 25 games. So, it's starting to get down to the wire. Things are going to get serious real quick. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens. But for Brian Fleurantin, I am Erica L. Ayala, and you have been listening to Gotta Get Up, a podcast for New York Liberty fans. We'll catch you next week, everybody.